welcome to Floyd Street's Finest. I'm Jack Grossman. No Coach Lieberman today. Know what I'll say? You just got me rolling for a little bit. Won't go too long. But between the Bahamas and the Casean Pryor injury and everything else, just wanted to make sure that we got something out here to react to what's really been a busy week for Louisville basketball here as they had the 2-1 trip down in Atlantis before getting the news earlier on Monday morning, rather, about Kaeson Pryor tearing his ACL, going to be out for the rest of the season. That's where we're going to start things. We'll get to the Bahamas in a little bit. The net came out earlier on Monday morning. Louisville's 30th in that and all the other stuff. But Floyd Street's Finest, part of the Field of 68 podcast network, as you may realize I'm in a different spot than I normally am. I'm back in Louisville, actually, for Thanksgiving still. Going to be able to catch Louisville Ole Miss on Tuesday night before I head back down to Atlanta. But you get the childhood bedroom view today. I don't know if people would like that or not, but you get to see how much of a, psycho I was as a kid. A little bit of that. But anyways, Floyd Street's Finest, part of the Field 68 Podcast Network. I'm at Jack Grossman 97 on Twitter, at Jack Grossman on Blue Sky, at Floyd Street F68 on Twitter as well. Follow, like, subscribe, all that stuff on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, however you are consuming this podcast here today. So, Casean Pryor, we'll jump right into it. Very big, unfortunate injury news for Louisville today. We'll talk about kind of why it's so big in terms of what Louisville's trying to do, the time of year it is. There's a lot to cover here. But number one, I think other than Chucky Hepburn, who was spectacular down in Atlantis, by the way, there's no way to get around it. He has kind of established himself as one of the best point guards in the country, which we all kind of knew. We didn't think it would be to this level, but the impact Chucky Hepburn has had on this team is absolutely second to none. Casean Pryor is not a far second behind in that. The way he has really taken in what Pat Kelsey is trying to do and really embraced it on both ends of the floor. You talk about, really, I think defensively is where it's been the most impactful. How aggressive he is, blitzing ball screens, jumping dribble handoffs, getting into passing lanes, creating a lot of deflections, turnovers, going the other way. He's the best rebounder on Louisville, which is a very scary thought now the rest of the year, not having him, and then for at least another 6 weeks, not having Abubakar Traore either with that broken arm. Louisville's going to be without their two best rebounders on a front line that, let's be completely honest, is undersized and probably a bit undermanned already. So to lose both of those guys now, that is a huge deal that cannot be ignored. And yes, Louisville's been a good offensive rebounding team, a really, really good offensive rebounding team. They're rebounding 10 over 36% of the shots they miss on the offensive end. That's 41st in the country. That has exceeded all expectations as far as hitting the glass has gone, especially on the offensive end. However, defensively, that's where the issue has been for the Cards. They are 227th per KenPom in defensive rebounding percentage. They're giving up just under 31%, 30.9% of the shots that they're forcing to be missed. They're giving up offensive rebounds. That is a number that, even fully healthy, is way, way too high, and that's something that's probably going to creep up a little bit more with Traore and now especially Casean Pryor out. That is a huge worrisome for Louisville. Yeah, if we're sitting here laying the year and going, where did this season go wrong? The number one thing that we might be looking at is, well, they didn't grab enough defensive rebounds. They gave up way too many extra possessions, second shot opportunities, and that could end up costing them multiple games so far, or down the line here. Because Casean Pryor, again, he's a double-double guy, a double-double machine in South Florida. He's really aggressive on the boards. He prioritizes that part of his game. And quite frankly, Louisville just doesn't have anyone that can replace that type of physicality and versatility and all that stuff. Offensively, he's going to be missed as well. He initiates a lot of offense. When he grabs those defensive rebounds, he is flying up the court. He's not waiting for an outlet pass. He's pushing the tempo and the pace that Pat Kelsey wants to have, and Louisville has been so successful at getting early on in the season. He's a pressure release for the guards. If you're facing that ball pressure, he can flash up to the top of the key, middle of the front court, get the ball, get into a dribble handoff and zoom action, anything like that, be able to be a passer and a guy that can attack on a team that doesn't have a lot of dudes that can beat you one-on-one. He's a guy that could really put the pressure on the defense and try to do that. You're not going to have that guy anymore. He was a willing three-point shooter. He hadn't hit a bunch of them. He was, I believe, 5 of 29 or 5 of 30 on the season, but that's something that you were kind of expecting that percentage to rise a little bit more as the season would go on because, he clearly had the green light just like everyone else does on the roster to shoot the three ball. So you're going to miss him in a lot of different ways. You just are. It's unfortunate. There's not really a way to get around it. So the question now for Louisville becomes, to take a gross sip of water. I can't, I don't have anyone else to do that. Usually you can sip water when the other guy's talking, but we're just going with it today. I'm sorry. But the question's going to be, how can Louisville replace that production? I don't think you can fully replace it, but I think there's two options here, and I would hope Pat Kelsey decides to go with both of these options in a way, and I'll explain in a second. The first thing you look at, okay, what other size does Louisville have to fill those minutes? And that's Kenai Ruth and James Scott are the two guys, and Ansel and eBay are the three guys you're going to look at and say, okay, these are our biggest dudes on scholarship that are healthy. Next man up mentality. We got to fill a bunch of minutes. We got to fill a bunch of production. It's up to these three guys to do that. I love Kenai Ruth's potential, but he hasn't played a lot. He hadn't played a lot of college ball. He's, averaging 3.3 rebounds per game in 10 minutes per contest so far. He's going to have to take a massive leap in terms of the amount of minutes he plays, in terms of the amount of production he can provide. That potential is going to have to translate into, production a lot quicker than a lot of people thought it was going to have to. That being said, I do think this is a really, really great opportunity for Kenai Ruth in terms of getting this extra experience, extra development early on that we weren't expecting to have to give to him. We thought he could be a plus. We thought he could be a guy. I know Coach Lieberman is very high on Kenai Ruth, of saying, look, he's a guy that can come on as the season goes along and really be a late impactful freshman later in the year. That time it has sped up. That timeline sped up. It's going to have to happen sooner rather than later for Louisville to salvage parts of their season. James Scott is another dude, a lot of potential. Love the athleticism, what he does at the dunker spot. He's really good at the dribble handoff and zoom action. He's your best shot blocker on the team. He's a guy that has potential to be a good rebounder. The biggest problem with him, he's played 126 minutes this year and has fouled 17 times. That's 5.4 fouls per 40 minutes. James Scott's biggest issue has been he's struggled to stay on the floor. That's part of the reason why Casean Pryor ended up replacing him in the starting lineup in the Bahamas to try to limit the amount of exposure to where you could get into early foul trouble. You're not going to have that luxury anymore. James Scott has to figure out how to stay on the floor, not to pick up cheap fouls, not to play aggressively, but not over aggressive to the point to where you're getting 2 fouls in 3 minutes and you're really, really handcuffing Pat Kelsey and what you can do there. He has to be able to stay on the floor and continue to develop his game as well. So those two dudes are very big X factors. Essel and eBay is a guy that I think is going to get some minutes as well. You saw him kind of crack the rotation a little bit once once Traore got hurt and broke his arm. He's a guy that's probably going to see his role expand a little bit more. He's an experienced dude. He's been in power conference basketball in the SEC at Georgia. So he's been there and seen a lot in college basketball that's going to be helpful to where he can kind of be, if you're playing, war in baseball, he might be just a wins above replacement. He might be the baseline of war, but that's something you can use right now. Be a big body and be aggressive, grab some rebounds, and do a lot of the dirty work that Louisville's going to need to be done to replace Casean Pryor. The other thing I really would love Louisville to do is U of L already before the injuries was undersized. They were playing small, positionless basketball, pace and space, all these fun modern terms we've been talking about. Another thing you can do, you can go even smaller. I think other than the injuries, the only thing that's been slightly underwhelming from Louisville so far this year on the offensive end has been, I feel like Terrence Edwards hasn't really found his stride yet. He looks a little bit like he's still trying to find his way in terms of how he fits into Kelsey's offense. He's not nearly as ball dominant as he was at James Madison. Javon Hadley can go a little bit with this as well. But those two guys on the wings, I don't think, while they've been good and they've had moments, I mean, Edwards had the 26 points against Bellarmine. They both hit some shots. There's room to expand Edwards' game within the offense more. And this, I don't want to call it a blessing in disguise because I still think you're losing a lot, especially defensively and size wise. But this could be a way to get Terrence Edwards more involved. Hadley too, but especially Terrence Edwards. You can slide him over to the four. You can do a little bit of, uh, to throw it back there for Louisville fans, Rick Pitino bridge year playing Kyle Kirk at the floor and going incredibly small. I think you can do that same thing. You can use Edwards as that pressure release guy in the high post and at the top of the key. You can use him as a guy in dribble handoffs and in zoom actions as the quote unquote big. You can get him initiated, involved in the offense that way to where he has the ball in his hands a little bit more offense often, can initiate offense, can be used as a screener a little bit more, and be used in different ways than just kind of standing on the wing or in the corner and waiting for the ball to swing to him and trying to do something off of that. I think you can really mix up his looks and be able to get him more involved in the offense now. And that's something that I'm really hoping to see against Ole Miss on Tuesday night and against Duke on Saturday. That might be a little bit tougher with all of Duke's size, but not everyone has Cooper Flag on the other side to where, or, I think you look at games against Ole Miss, like I said, Florida State, Kentucky's, North Carolina, especially with how small they are up front, you have this opportunity to where you can exploit matchups. And especially if and whenever Corin Johnson comes back, you have a lot more depth on the perimeter, on the wings, in the backcourt. I thought Chucky Hepburn and Corin Johnson were playing really, really well together as a backcourt. You can do that, and that can push Hadley to the three, Terrence Edwards to the four, and yes, a lot of it with Louisville is positionless basketball, but everyone still has their roles within that. I think all of that flexibility can really help Louisville try to overcome the injury because it's going to be difficult. There's no way to get around it. It's going to be very, very difficult to be able to do. As far as, how does this change expectations? It's a great question because basketball wise, this probably could not have happened at a worse opportunity for Louisville. I mean, I guess it could have happened right before the Bahamas where you had 3 games in 3 days. That probably would have been worse. But Louisville's in a stretch now where we've talked about it a lot. Louisville's schedule is incredibly front loaded to the point where you look at who they have coming up. U of L is going to have to make their NCAA tournament resume, the bulk of it, in the next 5 weeks. It's not particularly fair for a guy, for Pat Kelsey, in terms of having this being his first season, stepping in to this atmosphere, bringing on an entirely new roster. The only holdover being A.D. McCool, a walk-on from Kenny Payne's last year, and now having all of these injuries on top of it. 5 scholarship players hurt, 3 just in the last couple weeks. But when you look at U of L's schedule, the cards, and again, the net is very fickle. Things can change on that as the season goes along. Someone maybe like West Virginia falls apart in the Big 12 play. They change from a quad 1 to a quad 2 win. Maybe a team like Indiana, who looks absolutely dead after the Bahamas, is able to play to their talent a little bit and get cracking the top 50. I would expect, I know I just said as a hypothetical, I expect West Virginia to stay as a quad 1 win. They're at 29th in the net right now, so they got to stay in the top 50 to still be quad 1 for Louisville, and they were really impressive with Tucker DeVries, Javon Small, those guys. I think they're going to be a good team all year. They're going to exceed preseason expectations, so where I think that's going to be a quad 1 win. Indiana's much more of a crapshoot on that one. You look at the talent, and they still absolutely should be a top 10, 15 team in the country, but I don't want to turn this into an Indiana diatribe, but I don't think they're going to get that. So I expect that to probably stay a quad 2 win for Louisville, which is still really, really good work for U of L in the Bahamas to get a quad 1 win West Virginia, a quad 2 win, an absolute shellacking of Indiana, then almost get another quad 1 win against Oklahoma in that third game. That is a very good week for IU. And if you would have said that before the week started, prior injury aside, you would have absolutely taken that if you're U of L. It was a rousing success in the battle for Atlantis for Louisville. But U of L only has 7 quad 1 games come the rest of the year right now. And of those 7, 5 of them are between today, December 2nd, and January 11th against Pittsburgh, at Pittsburgh. That means in the next 5 weeks, you play 5 of the 7 most consequential games that you're going to play all season. That doesn't even include Ole Miss, who you play on Tuesday, who is 55th in net, which if things go right, they could, especially in the SEC, where that's the best conference in the country right now, they will have a lot of opportunities to pick up wins in that league to where they can move up and potentially be a quad 1 win as well. Even with that being at home makes it a little bit more difficult, but it's not impossible. Even a team like Florida State, who's gone under the radar of all this stuff right now, is quad 1 on the road, 67th in net. I don't know if they'll stay that way, but for right now it is. So you have the Duke game. We know that's going to be quad 1. Kentucky will be quad 1. Carolina, 26th in the net. That could go either way, but I expect that to still be a quad 1. And Pittsburgh on the road, which will be a Q1, and Clemson. Those 5 games are going to have so much weight on the rest of Louisville season in terms of, can you make the NCAA tournament? And if you can get there, what seed you're going to be. To not have Caseon Pryor during that stretch, this critical stretch, was outside of the conference tournament and whatever NCAA tournament postseason you end up having. This is your most important stretch of the regular season because of how front-loaded Louisville's schedule is. The ACC doing U of L no favors, to where U of L has 5 quadrant 1 ACC games, and 3 of them, Duke, Carolina, FSU, I just did terrible math, Pittsburgh, and Clemson. 4 of the 7 quad 1 games you're going to play all year in league are your first 4 or 5 games. That's not fair, but that's the hand you've been dealt, on top of Louisville and Pat Kelsey being aggressive in the non-con, which I applaud them for, I reward them for. You're already seeing the benefits of that. Yes, the Tennessee game didn't go well, but because Tennessee's quite literally the number 1 team in net right now, they're top 3 in KenPom, whatever metrics you want to look at, that loss isn't going to hurt you very much. You know what will help you, though? Having 2 neutral court wins over teams that very well could be NCAA tournament teams. That will help you. I don't know how much it'll matter that they came before Pryor got hurt. That depends year to year. I mean, part of it, Providence had some really good wins last season before Bryce Hopkins towards ACL, and I think they got punished for the fact they had those wins before he got hurt, one of them being a win over UConn. Who of course was dominant, won the national championship, but that varies year to year on the committee and based off what they do. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays in. But I know they won't mean nothing. They will mean something, and they could end up meaning a whole lot, those 2 wins for U of L. But Pat Kelsey and his staff are going to have to adjust on the fly now and do it against some really good competition, to where you're going to figure out what you want to do and mesh a new rotation together and get guys into spots to succeed, and hope and pray to God a little bit that it works for Louisville, because you can't afford to get shellacked over the next month plus. They need to win some of these games, starting with Ole Miss tomorrow night, which, by the way, KenPom doesn't factor in the injuries, but KenPom has Louisville winning that game by 4. If you could win that game, have a quad 2 win, that would help you a lot, because I'll be completely honest, I don't see a Duke win in the cards unless they're just absolutely overwhelmed by the road environment, which I don't see that being the case after Duke went into Arizona and won a couple weeks ago. An Arizona team that's not great, but that's still a very intimidating, similar type environment to what Louisville's going to provide in the Yum Center on Saturday. But going into Rupp Arena to play Kentucky is one that I think you may have a chance. In Kentucky's a really good team. We're going to learn a lot more about them. They play Gonzaga this week. They got, I believe, Ohio State coming up pretty soon in the CBS Sports Classic, to where we're going to learn some more about Kentucky. They really haven't been challenged outside the Duke game yet, but two teams that play very similar styles that want to accomplish a lot of the same things. I think UK has, especially now about Pryor and Traore, a lot more size than Louisville does, and are a little bit more athletic, but Louisville might honestly have the best player on the floor in Chucky Hepburn. That's not an impossible statement to say. Just a lot of that one comes down to U of L hasn't won a Reparita since I was in fourth grade in 2008. It's a very long time, and that's a tall task. But can you get a Florida State on the road? I think so. Can you get a North Carolina at home? I think that's a very good matchup for Louisville. Can you get a Clemson or knock off a Pittsburgh? If U of L can find a way to win 3 of those 5 games of or 3 of those 6, go 500 of Ole Miss, Duke, Kentucky, Florida State, North Carolina, and Clemson and Pittsburgh. If they could go 3-4, 4-3, I think you're sitting in a really good spot to make the NCAA tournament because yes, it's a tricky schedule after that. A lot of road games, which is going to be tough. 9 out of 14 in January and February. But if you can build that resume early, you're going to have a really good chance to be included in the NCAA tournament. Then you're trying to play seedings. And I still think there's a chance they can do that even without Kaeson Pryor. It becomes a lot tougher without him, and it's a rough hand to be dealt, but I'm not sitting here yet going, oh, whoa, the season is over at this point. It is way too early. You got to see how they adjust to it. You got to see how they grow throughout the year. But this is going to be a massive week for Louisville with Ole Miss and Duke. Before we get out of here, I do want to hit a little bit more on the Bahamas itself. I mean, the Indiana game, which we previewed ad nauseum here, probably for some of you guys between Coach Lieberman and I's breakdown, having Galen Clavio of Crimson Cast on. But a lot of it came down to, I said back when it got released over the summer, I loved Louisville's matchup in this game because I thought Indiana would get caught over rotation. They would leave a lot of dudes wide open, and they struggled taking care of the ball. And we saw all that. That being said, I did not think it was going to be a 28-point beatdown in a final score that really, I got a BS 7-0 run at the end there. It was really more of a 35-38, almost 40-point game there, the Bahamas. But that is the epitome of what Pat Kelsey's trying to do with this basketball team. Getting up and down, playing incredibly fast, pressuring the ball, forcing a crap ton of turnovers, and taking and making a lot of threes. I think Louisville was 10 of 27 in that game. That was the best case scenario for Louisville to play that team, and they played their style of basketball and absolutely whipped Indiana. The more important thing, though, is that we knew Louisville could play that way and win games that way. I was honestly, and a lot of this has to do with what I think of Indiana, which is not very much. I was more impressed, and I was damn impressed on Wednesday with what Louisville did against Indiana. Don't get me wrong; they thrived in that style of game. But I wanted to know, could they win different ways? Could they compete in games where they're not going up and down? They're not playing teams that just plays right into your hands on both ends of the floor like Indiana did. What happens when you get into a rock fight, when you get into a grinded out type game? What happens if you're not hitting the 3 ball, which Louisville wasn't in the West Virginia game, just 7 of 28 from 3? If you would have told me Louisville would play a low possession game all year, that was a half court contest, and they were only going to make 7 of 28 from 3, be outscored by 6 points on the 3-point line, and only win the turnover battle by 1 at 16-15, you probably think they would have lost that game by 12, 14, 15, 16, maybe even 18 points. But for Louisville, against a really good West Virginia team, a tough, a resilient West Virginia team that we saw come back to upset Gonzaga in the last minute of regulation and then in overtime on Wednesday, that we saw battle back when it looked like Louisville had the game won late in regulation on Thanksgiving Day, and then win another overtime game against I think it was Arizona on Friday. That is a really tough team to beat. And to go in and win that game playing West Virginia style, I get it. Now there's questions, can they do it without Pryor and all that type of stuff? But that is something, even with Casean Pryor, I wasn't sure Louisville could do. And for them to be able to prove that on a neutral court in that environment, playing back-to-back days, That is incredibly impressive from Louisville. That's the type of stuff where you got to say, okay, this Louisville team isn't going to be a bubble team. They're going to be a team that could be, a 6, 7 seed or better in the NCAA tournament. You point to games like that and say they don't just need to hit 10 threes and force 23 turnovers to win. There are other ways they can win basketball games like they did just out toughing West Virginia that one. And yes, they lost the Oklahoma game, but we saw a lot of that in that one as well, to where Louisville didn't go away. Things weren't going their way. They had the prior injury they were adjusting to on the fly that happened early in the second half. But that was a 3-point game. You're inbounding the ball in the last 10 seconds. That inbounds went terrible. I know people are mad wanting a technical foul for the Oklahoma player reaching over the sideline. Bob Valvano had a really good breakdown of that. That probably could have been called, but that's still last 10 seconds. You're right there. You had a chance to win the game against an Oklahoma team that made everything incredibly tough for you on the defensive end. That was incredibly impressive those 3 days in the Bahamas. And if things go well over the next month plus, we're all going to look back at that trip to Atlantis as being the launching pad of quote unquote Louisville basketball being back, all that stuff. It might also be the launching pad of holy crap, Chucky Hepburn's a top 3-point guard in the country. It very well might be. He absolutely dominated both the Indiana and the West Virginia games. He shredded up Miles Rice, who's one of the better point guards in the country. At least everyone thought he was going to be but he had a terrible week in the Bahamas, and I think a lot of it is because of what Chucky Hepburn did to him on day one, just absolutely messed with him the rest of the week. But he was spectacular on the defensive end on day one, the offensive end on day two, dropping a career high 32 points, 27 of them coming after halftime, and giving that ability to initiate offense off the dribble, break the defense down, get in and score himself, dish it out for threes, the type of stuff that we've been begging Louisville to be able to do. He provided that for U of L in both the Indiana game, but also the West Virginia and the Oklahoma game to an extent as well. You saw that for Chucky Hepburn. I honestly, because Chucky Hepburn was a really, really good player at Wisconsin, and of everyone Louisville brought in this year, I've been on the record a lot over the summer of he's the dude I was the most excited for that Louisville brought in. I thought he would be the biggest piece for the Cards, but not even I thought he would be this. You got to look back now and wonder what was Greg Gard doing in some of those situations to where Chucky's always been a great on-ball defender. He's wreaked havoc on that side of the ball, but it feels like he was almost restrained at Wisconsin. And obviously he's gotten better at working with Peyton Siva. I'm sure it doesn't help with or doesn't hurt there either. One of the best on-ball defenders and guys to generate steals, deflections, and pressure the ball and all that stuff. Not just in U of L history, but in college basketball history. To have him on the coaching staff, be able to work with Chucky Hepburn every day unlocks a lot more potential. But even without that in account, the way Wisconsin defends, where they don't pressure you a lot defensively, they really play a lot of pack line principles, stuff like that. It felt like Chucky was just limited by what Greg Gard would allow him to do in that system. And now when he's at Louisville, he just feels fully unleashed, picking up full court, harassing opposing guards for 94 feet, getting a lot more steals, having the green light to go for deflections and steals and turnovers to get easy buckets on the other end. You can tell, and this helps his offensive game too. He is so much freer and so much more confident on both ends of the floor than he was at Wisconsin. And I think a lot of that is a credit to Pat Kelsey really unleashing him to his full potential there, to where I'm not expecting 32 points a game out of Chucky Hepburn, but he's that dude now to where you can say, okay, we need a bucket late in the game. We're in a half court set. We can give the ball to Chucky, run a pick and roll, and he's going to get a shot for either himself or someone else. And I think that's what we saw from him in Atlantis. And without Kaeson Pryor, it's going to be even more important for that. They're going to need Corin Johnson back too. I know Kelsey said he was going to see his shoulder specialist sometime this week. If he could come back as well and be another guy that can grade off the dribble some, that makes Louisville much, much, much more difficult to defend and a lot less predictable to defend when they can score in other ways than just layups off turnovers and trying to get 3-point shots. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Ole Miss is going to be a fun test on Tuesday night. with how they'll play the no middle defense, trying to take away drivers. I think Louisville can get some open shots out of that, but that's going to be a very difficult challenge. That'll be a very similar style of defense to what they just saw in Oklahoma. So another probably more of a slow it down rock fight, but Ole Miss has some offensive firepower. Sean Petula, who Louisville fans will be familiar with coming over from Virginia Tech. They got some shooting as well. Going to be a really fun game the Center tomorrow. That's pretty much, we went for about a half hour. That's pretty good for just one guy rambling. But what tentative plan is for Coach Lieber and I to be back on Thursday to record. Then, so either Thursday afternoon, evening, or Friday morning, we'll get something out to recap Ole Miss, get his thoughts on Casean Pryor in the Bahamas, and also preview a pretty damn big game against Duke on Saturday. So that's all I got for today. For Floyd Street's Finest, I'm Jack Grossman. We'll catch you next time.